Hello guys, have you been guessing where you can get the best movie recap? Well, it's here on Riveted. Everyone was born free, but few have to pay the price. Today, we are recapping a film, 12 Years a Slave, so please be aware of the spoilers ahead. The film is based on the historical horrors witnessed by the Black community, which persisted for decades and cannot be forgotten, as they can only be healed through reflection and acknowledgement. That's why it's essential to revisit this film and understand the role of history and time, shaping the present laid in front of us and may guide us towards a better and prosperous future. This film begins with the eradication of individuality, as it fades in with a group of Black men standing in one frame, amidst the treacherous and muggy fields of Louisiana, and their white master is explaining the process of cutting sugarcane, and then every plantation worker starts chopping sugarcane while singing "My Lord Sunshine," in which Solomon Northman appears to be working along with others, humming to the woes of his self and soul. At night, Solomon sneakily starts cutting the wood in the shape of a pin and collects the juice of strawberries to make the ink. Sitting in the dark with no light except a candle, he starts writing the letter, but its intended purpose was purposely not revealed this moment. He then tries to close his eyes to sleep in the animal shed along with other slaves. It was a congested space, but it became more unsettling when a woman sleeping next to him forced Solomon for sex. It was heart-wrenching as the desperation of the woman was encountered by Solomon's reluctance, but he gave in due to his empathetic nature, which made the woman realize her selfishness and cries after reaching the height of excitement. He felt guilty as well and starts to dwell in his past life. Contrary to the shed, Solomon is now in a comfy bed along with another woman and smiling in love and passion. Then he starts adjusting the string of his violin delicately to be performing in a large room occupied with a lot of white people dancing, according to his music, and ended up praising him for his brilliance and talent. After reaching home, Solomon looks after his kids Margaret and Alonzo and put them to bed while admiring them. He ends up in a similar bed with his wife Anne and tries to subtly register his distaste of her upcoming travel and leaving him alone for some time while kissed her goodbye. Solomon greets his family as they leave on the horse cart while he continues to stroll in the park of his hometown Saratoga, where he was introduced to two young white men from Washington, played by Scott McNary and Taran Killam. They offered Solomon to showcase his musical talent and perform with their circus in Washington in exchange for a lot of money for 2 weeks of service. Solomon instantly agreed and arrived to Washington with both of them in awe and admiration. At dinner, he appreciates the generosity of the men and starts drinking heavily in happiness to enjoy the courtesy he was being offered, almost like he won a lottery ticket overnight. But suddenly, everything changes as Solomon wakes up in a dark place with his hands and feet were cuffed like an animal. He was not able to understand what has happened, but a few glimpses started playing on his mind of the last night, which made clear to him that he was drugged and kidnapped by the same men offering the most pleasant deal of his life. As he was wrestling with his new reality, 2 slave peddlers arrived in his cell, and he tries to make them understand that he is a free man from Saratoga and not a slave. But the peddlers refuse to believe him and make him understand the new reality which is just forged out for him. But Solomon remains resilient, and peddlers start whipping him till he couldn't resist the pain and cries for help. Solomon struggles to settle in with his new reality while witnesses the horrors of the slave custom step by step. From not being allowed to take a bath in privacy to abrupt beatings for no reason. He starts befriending other slaves and soon realizes that in order to survive this tragedy, he must keep his head down and stay quiet. Later at night, Solomon and the other slaves were put in the lower deck of the ship to be transferred and sold in the state of New Orleans, where slave trade was legal at the time. The prospects of which haunted Solomon, and he tries to build up a resistance with the other slaves, as life would have no meaning if they accept and did not fight. He garnered the support he needed, but soon realized after witnessing the murder of a slave in cold blood that how much inconsequential is killing of a Black person. He throws the dead body with the help of another slave, who reminded that there is no point grieving the dead, as now he can enjoy the freedom which life doesn't guarantee us. Solomon arrived to New Orleans and lined up with the other slaves called out by their new names by a slave merchant. Everyone stood up according to the description of their physical features and gender, except Solomon. The merchant called out Platt again and again, but he did not recognize till the merchant slapped him on his face his new identity. The merchant took everyone to his lavish estate and ordered them to bathe, whereas everyone obliged, and the slaves communally showered together and dressed up to be presented to the potential buyers. Platt was lined up with other slaves in a room when a white man named Master Ford decides to buy him with another slave, Eliza, who was separated from her children as Master Ford could only afford to buy two. While the slave traders separated the mother from her children, Platt was asked to play the violin to equate the madness of the atmosphere with his music. Platt, with other slaves, traveled to the Master Ford residence and was shown a little hospitality due to the good nature of Ford. But the next day, he was immediately put under work of a skilled yet sadistic carpenter, John Beats, who never hesitated insulting the slaves while singing a derogatory song on the plight of Negroes. He established authority, and everyone was scared except Platt, who, after adjusting in work, came up with an idea and dared to present it to Master Ford. He presented to sail through the creek as it was deep enough to carry the weight of the timber, which was challenged by John, but instantly appreciated by Ford. After getting approval, Solomon started working and manages to decrease the distance of carrying the merchandise. Ford was really inspired by the exceptional execution of the plan and therefore offered his violin to Solomon. As Platt arrived in the shed and eating his food, he advises Eliza to stop mourning her lost children, but she insulted him with his lack of courage and being subservient to Master Ford to enjoy this horror while it lasts, but it would remain a horror. Platt snubbed her and reminded about the thickness of lashes he has received in the futile effort of rebellion, and that's why it is better to stay low and survive. But soon Platt realized that he was completely living a lie, as he was initiated into a fight with John, who wrongfully accused him of placing the wood not as he mentioned, and therefore ordered him to strip down so that he can lash him out and avenge for his hard work and commitment. Platt resisted and beats John with his own whip till they were separated by another overseer, who advises Solomon to not leave the premise of the real estate as his life is now in danger. After a while, John, along with the other two men accompanying him on horses, abducted Platt and tied his neck to the tree to strangle the life out of him. Platt was taking his last breaths when the overseer came to his rescue and ordered everyone to leave, as Platt is the property of Master Ford, and whosoever kills him will have to pay the debt to Ford. Everyone left the overseer, while Platt was still hanging from the tree trying to adjust his weight and feet on the muddy ground. Hours and hours passed and slaves continued their work, while Platt remains hanging till he was offered some water by a female slave. This long, heart-wrenching portrayal was also pertinent because time was frozen for Platt in captivity, as it would not be enough no matter how hard he tried. The rope is the symbol of the institutional entanglement of such laws that grapples the most persecuted and marginalized in its web. Platt was rescued by Master Ford, who took him in his house and shared that he has been sold to another master, Edward Epps, who was not particularly known to be nice to slaves, but because no one was interested to buy Platt due to the reputation he cultivated for himself after beating John. Platt tries to reveal that he is also a free man, but Ford denies to accept it because of his fear of the consequences it can create for his business and family. The next morning, Platt was transferred to Edward Epps, who preached about the men's right to own his own property, whether it means lashes or even killing them. Everything is just and fair in the eyes of the Lord. Platt was scared, but he was beginning to understand the insignificance of the labor, and therefore excelling in it does not guarantee safety. That's why he starts resisting and only managed to collect the cotton according to his will and strength. It was the beginning of his conscious unshackling from the chains of slavery, as he starts understanding that it is only his physical body that is captive, but his mind is free. Platt received the lashes due to mediocre amount of cotton he collected, but Master Edwards did appreciate a young black woman, Patsy, whom collected a lot more than any other male slave, and immediately came into the attention of Edward. At night, Platt was not able to sleep due to pain in his back, but suddenly Edward arrived and ordered everyone to gather at his residence for the party. All the slaves were dancing to the music of Platt, who was playing at the side of the room while Edward was enjoying the pleasant sight of Patsy. This growing affection was a cause for concern for Edward's wife, and therefore she hit Patsy with a bottle on her head, while ordered her husband to remove her from the house. But Edward snubbed at her and suggested to leave herself before even daring to question the real motivations behind. The next morning, Platt was called out by Mrs. Edward to run some errands for her along with a tag to carry so that people could recognize that he is Master Edward's property and that no one would kill him on his journey. As he was about to leave, Mrs. Edward inquired if he knows how to read and write, but he intently declines. But his lie was caught by her, and she suggested that it is better to stay hidden, otherwise he would have to carry more lashes on his body. Platt finds the courage he was brewing inside of him for quite a while and decides to run away on his journey, but as he accidentally runs up some white men hanging two black men with ropes. The trauma reignited within him, and he freezes, but managed to get past them after showing them the tag. He bought the groceries and returned straight to the house as he was now aware of the danger that entails if he decides to run away. The next morning, Platt was asked to bring back Patsy from Master Shaw's residence, and he immediately runs away to fetch her. Upon reaching, Mrs. Shaw insisted to have a cup of tea with her as she herself was a black woman married to a white landlord. Then Mrs. Shaw advises both of them that their life doesn't cost much, so that they better swallow every insult and tolerate beatings because every evil has to come to an end one way or the other. Besides, also contradicting that she never set foot once in the fields and receiving any lashes only because she sacrificed her body to a rich white folk. A cost too little to bear compared to the pain and suffering of the rest of the community. Platt and Patsy came back while Edwards was already very anxious and started screaming to punish Patsy, but Platt advised her to run away. Edward notices that Platt has whispered something and chose to punish him instead, but he runs away from here and there till Edward fell off in his pursuit till they got separated by Mrs. Edward, who immediately intervened and questioned the dishonorable gaze of her husband towards Patsy. Edward was hurt as his manhood was questioned, and therefore he decides to take out on Patsy, and he raped her brazenly outside the shed where everyone could listen, but they ignored except Platt, who was not able to sleep where Patsy remained numb while Edward was inside her, which made him more anxious. But he satisfied himself by slapping her and leaving half naked out in the open. The next morning, Platt continued running his daily errands, but the fire inside of him was already burning since last night. So he sneakily steals some paper to write while coming back to the house. At night, Edward again gathered all the slaves to dance and party, but Mrs. Edward was filled with rage and jealousy. She hits Patty again for not being obedient enough and tries to rile Edward against her to throw her away. Patsy was reeling in pain and agony due to being constantly violated by both Edward and his wife. Therefore, she wakes up Platt and asks him a favor in exchange of jewelry she has stolen from the mistress. She demands Platt to end her life in a nearby river by drowning her till her life is ended. Platt immediately protested that he will not commit an ungodly act, but Patsy explains to him that it will not be wrong as it will be an act of kindness and God also loves those who practice mercy with each other. But Platt turned her down and laid down to sleep. The next morning, when Edward finds out that his cotton crop is rotten due to the weather, so he finds an excuse to blame the slaves and decides to send them for a while and therefore lends his slave to a Judge Turner for one season. While leaving his slaves at the door of the turner, he threatened everybody to behave as if they would do otherwise. Platt's mind was getting free day by day, and he was able to recognize his previous self of Solomon, which is why we see him at the fields of sugarcane again, and the journey of losing his self to becoming more aware about his sense of self and the world that occupies him or tries to captivate him. That's why he starts writing the names of his children and wife on the violin to remember what is precious to him and not lose his sanity in the madness. The next day, Judge Turner called Platt due to his exceptional work and asked him to play at one function, and he can also keep the money with himself. Platt was overwhelmed with joy and also felt getting closer towards his freedom. But soon, it turned out to be only a passing season, and Edward called all his slaves back to his residence. Platt was again hesitant to work beyond his physical and spiritual health, unlike others, and therefore received lashes again. At night, Platt was comforted by a white guy who also just arrived to work as a slave due to his debts. Platt opens a little to know him better and came up with a new plan. Later that night, Platt sneakily recovers his money from a nearby tree and approaches the white guy and begs him to send a letter to his friends in the north so that they could come and rescue him. After considering, the white slave took the money and assured that he will do it without telling anyone about it. But he did exactly the opposite, as he revealed everything to Edward, who arrived at the shed and took Platt outside while holding a knife in his hand. He inquired that if he knows how to read and write, and if he has asked someone to send the letter. But Platt was now not a nervous and scared person, and he confidently argues the whole acquisition while manages to convince Edward of his innocence, but also convinced himself to not to try anything as he burns the letter. The next morning, an old slave dies, and everyone gathered to sing him goodbye about his achievements and struggles as a slave all of his life, and it made Platt more uncomfortable as it never occurred to him that he could die being a slave. But he decided to be patient this time, which is why when Mr. Bass arrived to monitor the construction of a new shed and got in an argument later with Edward, he chose to quietly observe even after their quarrel was complete. Bass belonged from Canada, and he was liberal and fundamentally against the practice of slavery, as it denies every lawman has created on the earth and even natural laws. But he failed to understand that Edward was pushed so far by his privilege that there was no point to reason with him. But Platt did realize in the next day when Edward was going crazy to find Patsy, who stepped out of the property to lend a soap. But Edward condemned her lashes till her life ceased to exist, and Platt was ordered to leave those lashes if he wants every other slave to be alive. At first, Platt was reluctant due to the pain he was inflicting on her, but later when Edward pointed out the gun at others, he whipped with force, but he was hurting exactly the same like Patsy. Because Patsy was being inflicted physically on her body, but Platt was being inflicted on his soul. The next day, Platt finds courage and spoke with Bass and explains him the situation and pleads to send the letter to his family. After giving some thought, Bass felt his duty to help, coupled with the fact that he was a staunch critic of this slave practice and also vocal about it. He decides to help and never say a word to anyone. After a few days, when Platt was working on the fields with other slaves, a cart stopped and Sheriff approached him. Platt was flummoxed by the presence of a man near the cart, but he recognizes his old acquaintance who knew his real identity. And therefore, he reveals to the sheriff that his real name is Solomon, while Edward tries very hard to contest, but the sheriff controlled him and Parker threatened with bankruptcy. While leaving this whole life behind, Solomon was approached by Patsy to take her with him, but he was not allowed to accompany another, so he consoles with her and leaves with Parker. Finally, Solomon arrived back to his family after being separated for more than 12 years, and only because he just decided to take up on a business offer and traveled with the two white men to Washington. He apologizes to his family, but it was also meant to be directed at the viewers who can be prejudiced and persecuted on the basis of their sex, religion, and color. That's why this film is not about a single individual or one community, but it's about every one of us to reflect on our conscience and answer what it means to be human. Because there is no mention of time throughout the film, except when the protagonist apologizes to his family for looking a bit different, which beautifully showcases that time ceases to exist in prison, no matter how many days and nights pass by, because it's only a matter of time when natural laws imposed itself and redefines what it means to be alive. That's why it ends on the last frame of Solomon's whole family while emphasizing the individuality which born out from the sum total of the relationships we have with our friends and family.